welcome everyone. Thrilled to have you all with us today for today's investor Q&A with Levin Health. We're joined by Mark here. Before we get into the presentation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I am beaming in from today. Birchal is based on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, Birchal is working with Levin Health on an upcoming crowdsource funding offer. What is crowdsource funding, or CSF, you ask? You may know it as equity crowdfunding, and it's a relatively new form of fundraising in Australia that allows startups, small or growing businesses to raise capital from a large number of smaller or retail investors and wholesale or sophisticated investors through an online platform like Birchal. Now, instead of seeking funding from traditional sources such as banks or venture capitalists, companies can turn to the general public, often their communities or customers, to raise money in exchange for shares or equity in their business. Now, Birchal Financial Services will be the licensed intermediary for the offer. The information and discussion in this webinar is for informational purposes and should not be considered as advice or a recommendation to invest. Please, as always, do your own research. Always consider the offer document and the general CSF risk warning before investing. That's all available on birchal.com. Now, I'm almost done with the boring bits. A little bit of info of how today's session will run. We'll have a presentation from Mark, and then we'll be switching to a Q&A. So if you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A bubble. If you have a question throughout the session, please pop it in the Q&A box, and then we can answer these when we get to the Q&A time at the end. Now, we are recording today's session, so if you do have to jump off early, we completely get it. It's busy. A recording will be sent around afterwards. So that is enough from me. Thank you all for your patience. I'm thrilled to hand over to Mark, who's going to give you the lowdown on Levin Health. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for potential investors giving us an hour or half an hour or so of your time. We are very grateful for your interest, and I encourage you to ask any questions you like. I've been the MD now. I'm into my third year. I invested 4 years ago in Levin Health, and in fact, let me start that with a bit of self-indulgence. So I invested in, as I said, 4 years ago. The first thing I did was I asked my doctor, what does the medical profession think of medicinal cannabis? And my doctor's an old, has since retired. His answer straight away was enormous potential, but not enough research. So I'm going to talk to you about the research plans the company has. I live in Melbourne, and we were locked down for during that period of time. And I remember one weekend just binging on medicinal cannabis videos and documentaries and research, and came out of it thinking, I'm not being surprised at my doctor's response. So I invested 4 years ago. I took on the job 3 years ago, and I've introduced you to all these people to our advisory board. And unashamedly, we lead with these 6 athletes. The number one, look, medicinal cannabis sector is pretty generic in Australia. Very competitive. Quite a bit of Me Too activity. We think there'll be all sorts of consolidation over the next little while. So it's all about, at the moment, it has been a mad scramble to try and establish a brand in an environment where you can't advertise. So we had a sports orientation, and these 6, so that's Damien Oliver with a sort of solemn face on the left. He's comfortably the country's greatest ever jockey, and was attempted to win his 4th Melbourne Cup on the weekend on Tuesday. Damien Hardwick is in a white shirt above him. For those that don't know AFL football, Damien Hardwick is a legend of AFL footy. He won 2 premierships, excuse me, as a player at Essendon and Port Adelaide, and then 3 as the coach of Richmond in the AFL, one of the really big clubs in the AFL, and he's now the coach of the Gold Coast Suns. Lauren Jackson probably needs no introduction, but she's comfortably, well, in fact, I don't know a lot about basketball, but my friends have told me that she's not only comfortably the Australia's greatest woman basketballer, but she's in the conversation as one of the best women basketballers of all time. Speaking of which, Andrew Johns is on her left shoulder. Andrew is well known to New South Wales and Queensland, or in fact anybody associated with the rugby league. He's an immortal in that game, and a hell of a nice guy too, by the way, and one of the greatest of all time in that sport. Andrew Bogut, excuse me, Andrew Bogut is on his left. Andrew's comfortably the country's greatest ever male basketballer, #1 draft pick in the NBA draft. I'll tell you a bit more about him at the end of the presentation. And Alistair Clarkson is the coach of the North Melbourne Footy Club. He had a very good career as a player at North Melbourne and Melbourne, and then an exceptional career as an AFL coach with the Hawthorn Footy Club, winning 4 premierships. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is our Sport Advisory Board. The purpose of these people, by the way, 4 out of 6 of them are individual investors in the company, and they all get paid in shares. Excuse me, I've got a throat in my throat. Hang on a minute. Sorry about that. They all get paid in shares, some a little bit of cash, but it's a fraction. The majority of these guys have got shares in the company and get paid in shares. So we've got great alignment with them. And the #1 thing that differentiates Levin Health from the rest of the players in the sector is sport. And I'll explain that a little bit later. Right. The way in which I've structured this presentation is very simple. Past, present, future. I'm going to give you a history on where we've been, where we are now, and more importantly, our future. So we started shortly after medicinal cannabis became legal in this country in 2016. In fact, I think we were incorporated in 2017. We started out with a license to manufacture and aspirations to vertically integrate, and we had a farm and a license. The farm was in the eastern pocket of Victoria. We had plans to build a facility. We had a Canadian expert that was going to come down and oversee that construction, and then COVID hit, and we had to stop that. We couldn't do any work on the manufacturing, but others had already stolen a march on us. So we pivoted in the COVID period and have since sold the farm, let the license lapse. So we are upstream now. Sorry, let me get that right. Downstream, and we buy from local manufacturers. I mentioned earlier our sports orientation. We started that in an environment, by the way, where you're not allowed to advertise, and as a means of establishing a brand in a very, very cluttered sector. And it's been an outrageous success. And the second thing that that separates us is research. There is a worldwide dearth of research. A lot of potential investors that I've been speaking to, and anyone that's interested in the medicinal cannabis sector, who has been to the US of A, will often come back and say, wow, you've got to see what's going on over there in the US. And you're right. They are right. It is a very active sector. However, there is a federal prohibition in the United States. So there's a roughly 80% of the states that have legalized medicinal cannabis. But whilst the federal prohibition's in place, that's prohibiting the universities in the US from taking money on the one hand from the federal government and doing any medicinal cannabis research. So Australia, Israel, and Canada are the 3 that have had a good run with federal prohibition being lifted. And we are very pleased to have ethics approval at La Trobe Uni to do a phase 2 randomised, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial under the aegis of Peter Bruckner, who's the what they call the principal investigator. So those words I used a moment ago, double-blind, randomised, placebo-controlled, they constitute a gold standard trial. So this trial will be peer-reviewed and is anticipated to start next year. But when we put the company together, we thought we're going to need a few things to separate ourselves, and they really are world-class research and world-class sport. We sold our first product in April of 2021. I'd been involved only a few months, and at that stage we had some contracts that said we needed to move 14,000, I think it was 14,000 units by Christmas of 2022. And I can remember thinking, boy, we've just sold 1 unit halfway through April, 1 bottle of that balance on the right. How on earth are we ever going to get to 14,000 by Christmas of next year? And to my astonishment, we did it with 1 leg in the air, and our growth has been unbelievable since then. So that's a quick snapshot of the past and an important pivot away from manufacturing. Since then, we have grown rapidly. In fact, according to our CFO, we have just had our first $1 million month. So you can see revenue growing dramatically. It will continue to grow in the 4th quarter of this year, and we'll be celebrating the fact that in October we have unaudited numbers, have cracked through the $1 million barrier, which is a wonderful accomplishment. we sold 5.2 million. Well, there you go. There's a good example. In the last 12 months, ended 30 June, we had 5.2 million, and we've just had 1 million in the month of October. So our growth is something that we're very proud of. We've also grown in prescribers. Not sure yet, but we're going to be very close to getting our 500th prescriber in October. And that's, well, you can see we had 460 by the end of August. That's the great Andrew Johns. The reason I'm highlighting him is that it's very hard to get to see a doctor, regardless of what you're trying to sell. They're very busy people. It's really hard to get into them to present for medicinal cannabis. There are lots of competitors. Last count, there's over 400 products that an Australian GP can prescribe. By the way, we estimate that 90% of healthcare professionals are not yet on board with medicinal cannabis. Most of them didn't learn it at university, but they're all impatiently waiting for the research, which is another reason I think our investment in Latrobe is so exciting. But anyway, with that number slowly growing, what we do with our athletes is we have dinners a couple of times a year. So last month, Andrew Johns was the guest of honour at 2 dinners we held in New South Wales. Our sales team invite prospective doctors to dinner. We take them out to dinner on a Tuesday night, so they're not too thirsty, and the bill's not all extravagant, but it's always a really good night. The guest of honour is an athlete. In this case, it was Andrew. We are accompanied by a doctor that is an expert in the field, but there's no doubt that the athletes are the reason why these people come 30 or so, typically each dinner, middle of the week. The athletes, in this case Andrew, give a very, very powerful case study. And in his case, his life has been changed for the better in remarkable ways. And then the specialist takes over and provides a scientific presentation about how medicinal cannabis works. That's the modus operandi, and we have steadily grown, and we're nearly at 500. And last month, those 2 dinners, there would have been, I'm guessing, at least 40, probably 50 prescribers who we hosted on that night, who heard from Andrew and then were told about the science behind medicinal cannabis from an expert, and we grow our prescribers on that basis. So where we are at the moment, I mentioned that we pivoted away. We are now what's called capital light, knowledge heavy. We have no debt. We decided not to invest in manufacturing. That was a very clever decision, because the people that manufacture in our sector have a completely different skill set to what Levin Health's got. In fact, most of our staff are in the sales and marketing roles. There's myself, an office administrator, and our CFO, and the rest of the team are in the field and taking care of marketing. So that's our role, and we purchase from 2 companies, but for the time being in Australia. We've just expanded that to an order of craft dried flower from Canada. But for now, that is a representation of us. We have a world-class board. If you haven't already done so, I'd encourage you to Google look into our on our website and familiarise yourself with our board. You'll see Jen Morris's name there. We're so lucky to have her. Until very recently, she was on Whisky Metal Board, which is Andrew Forrest's board, the top handful of companies in the country. And so to get her on the Forrest board, to be on our board, was a real coup. She's a dual Olympic gold medalist in field hockey and is on many mining listed boards. So she's a star. But we've got a wonderful board. Excuse me. We've got this Australia-wide renowned sports orientation with the Sports Advisory Board, and we have this ethics approval for the phase 2 trial that I mentioned at Latrobe. That's going to cost us north of $3 million. The federal government give a 43.5% rebate, so it's and scientists in Australia are world class, but it's a significant investment. And the reason we're raising money through Birchal is for the purpose of finishing this trial. I estimate we're halfway through it. And then Dr. James Stewart, and now he's the guy on the left there talking to Damien Hardwick. He's on our medical advisory board. He's my doctor. I reckon I've referred at least 100 people to him. He's overseeing a trial that we are just starting with capsules that have no THC. That's the part of the plant that makes people get high. So we stripped that out, and we've got these capsules with CBD and CBG. In other words, we think they're ideal for tradies, FIFO workers, anybody that has to drive where THC is illegal other than in Tasmania. So at the moment, we're making great inroads into the research, and we have now got this Sports Advisory Board, which has given us a brand that is the envy of the game. I suppose it's more important, Anna, to talk about the future. This is why sport works so well for us. 80% of the medicinal cannabis market are for these things: chronic pain, anxiety, stress, and sleep disorders, and they are all things associated with sport. So if you look at Damien Oliver on the right, you will have seen the video, presumably, and he talks about the pain that he endures because of all the accidents he's had riding horses. He's obviously a champion jockey, but has had a long career, and on many occasions has been injured, and that's given rise to chronic pain. It's very hard for athletes to sleep, get a good night's sleep, and they live in a highly stressed environment. So the beauty of having this sport orientation is that you don't have to be a great jockey or a world-class athlete to have pain, stress, and sleep disorders. But the sports orientation allows our athletes to cut through and provide really very powerful case studies that people can relate to, because we Levin Health are targeting those three, what we call the big three, that just about everybody knows, is either dealing with themselves or knows somebody. So it's a very clever orientation. It wasn't my decision, I inherited it, but I'm very pleased for it. We'll start the trial in 2024, as long as this raise goes to plan, and finish it in 2025. The capsule trial is a small observational trial at the moment. We are planning to fold that in underneath La Trobe Uni with ethics approval. And that will become a significant body of work for us. So research, sport. One of the things that I have learned in the 3 years since I've been here is that you're much better off having bespoke products rather than generic, and bespoke's a fancy word for exclusive products. So the bigger we've got, we'll sell 5,000 units to get that $1 million in October. So that gives us a fair bit of grunt with the suppliers, and the bigger we are, the better margins we get, but we can also buy products on an exclusive basis, and they're the ones that are the most profitable and that sell the best. Interesting about imports, excuse me, I've just got a cough again, sorry. I've got this frog in the throat. On the 30th of June, the TGA rules changed so that imports need to have a license. In other words, prior to 30 June, and I'm going to exaggerate here to make this point, we could import poorer quality products that were not subject to the same construction standards, manufacturer standards as they are in Australia. Those rules changed, and now imports need to be licensed. In other words, they need to certify that they're GMP, what's called good manufacturing practices. In other words, a level playing field with the Aussies. So we've had an Australian-made and Australian-grown philosophy up until now, but we've just placed an order for 3 craft-dried flowers out of North America, because we can now import without any question about quality. And once again, those new products allow us to get an increase in margin, because we get better scale economies, because we have to buy significant amounts for them to be bespoke. So I think new products, if I look at the future of this industry, a couple of things I'm forecasting: there'll probably be some consolidation, but the companies that win will be able to be big and robust and strong enough to offer bespoke, i.e. exclusive products, and have plenty of them, and probably import a few. Well, by the way, in the last 6 or so months, we've spoken to 10 international manufacturers. So importing is on the rise. If you become a shareholder with Levin Health, and I hope you do. By the way, I was saying this to somebody the other day. The reason I'm excited about the Birchal capital raise is that we, touch wood, if we're good enough, we'll get several thousand new shareholders involved with us, many of whom are likely to be patients. I must say, in the time that I've had this job, and I've spent a lot of my professional career working in sport, particularly AFL football, which is very popular in Victoria and the southern states, I've never had a job where people are more interested, ever. So a lot of my investors at the moment have done so on the basis that they take medicinal cannabis themselves or know somebody who does. So to be able to attract a couple of thousand extra shareholders, I'm hoping will give rise to a big uplift in customers as well. So if you accept our invitation, and I hope you do, to become a shareholder, our use of funds, if it's going to fall under these two brackets, we'll be completing our research and investing significant amounts of money in inventory. That's it, Anna, in terms of the presentation. I think it would be handy to, if we can do this, to play Andrew's interview and then submit to question and answer.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. That's so interesting. I think your point, particularly around, the more you've never worked in an industry that's had more interest, I think it's just a testament to how much the word's getting out there and people want to know, because, as you said, everyone, if it's not yourself, someone who, could really benefit from such products.
Just before you leave that point, have a look at that top. You ask yourself, Anna, of your friends, and you look as though you're a fair bit younger than me, but I'm in my 50s. Just about all my friends are suffering with some sort of pain, wanting to stay active. There are roughly three target audiences: very old people who are in unrelenting agony, people in their middle age like me who want to stay active, but sometimes can't play golf, go for a run, and then younger people that are suffering with stress and anxiety. So all of us, in my opinion, will have somebody that falls into that category. And since I've been associated with this business, every second day I talk to somebody and end up referring them. That's why I've given so many referrals to James. But anyway, I digress. Take it away.
Yeah, and I think there's also misinformation. You only know what you know, and the limitations. I've become very familiar with your advertising limitations, which are there obviously for good reason, but there's a real lack of information, which is where, as you said, doctors hesitant to subscribe because of, lack of information or a lack of research, which is what you're here to change. So before we go any further, we've got lots of time for questions at the end. So please, I can see a few coming through. Please pop them in. We've got a little bit of a presentation here, which we're thrilled to show you. I hope the sound is going to work. So if anyone can pop in the question and answer, if you can actually hear this, please let me know, or if you can't, but I'll hit play now.
Can I talk on top of this, Anna? Yeah, okay. So this is an intro to Andrew. He's our most recent member of the advisory board, and it's fair
I'll
to
just
say
pause it.
An absolute superstar in the game. Anybody that's associated with basketball will know him, but if you're not, he's as good as they get.
Alrighty, we'll kick it off.
The wonders of modern technology.
Good stuff. Alrighty. Well, some really great insights there. If anyone's familiar with Andrew Bogut or, sport in Australia, I'm sure that was really fascinating, and to hear his perspective on his involvement with Levin Health. So we've got some time now for the Q&A. We've got a question here from Ryan to kick us off. They've asked, the website refers to the trial product as a licensed, patented cannabinoid formulation. Does this mean Levin has bought the license?
Very good question, Ryan. The license is held by Zalira, and we have the patent is held by Zalira, which is a listed company, and we have a license, watertight license with them. So that's the short answer. The long answer is practically we have access to this, exclusive and unfettered access to this formulation. Before we invested in the phase 2 trial, we did an observational trial using the formula pre-COVID at St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne, and it succeeded in getting people off opioids in a statistically significant enough number. So we have road tested this formulation and are confident that it'll have a good chance of succeeding. So there's the background to it.
And then Brian's also asked, if the phase 2 is successful, what happens next? Is there a phase 3?
Yeah, so I knew very little about it. In fact, here's another little bit of background. When I took this job on, I spoke to a couple of friends of mine who are doctors, and they said, listen, be really careful about clinical trials. They are very hard, very expensive, and if you get into it, you've got to have the right protocols. And I had no idea about the protocols. So I asked around, and I was encouraged by the people at La Trobe Uni to do a one-day online course. And so, Ryan, I did, and this is what I learned, and this is an idiot's guide to clinical trials. There's 4, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. Phase 1 is safety, and that's the industry's past. That phase 2 is a trial in one geography, and this is what we're doing in Melbourne, up to 114 patients in Melbourne at La Trobe Uni. If it succeeds, the next step is to do a phase 3 trial, and that is in multiple geographies, typically around the world, so that you're able to get to the end of a phase 3 clinical trial and say, we have tested this, in this case, this medicinal cannabis formula. It is safe and it works regardless of whether you're an Aussie or, whatever your background are around the world, so that you can then go back to the TGA in Australia or the FDA and say, we have tested this formulation, it's safe, typically regardless of whether you're in Europe or Africa or South America or Australia, throughout the world. And then a phase 4 trial is once the products have been in existence for a while, you then go back and test to make sure that the first step is safety. In answer to your question, though, once we complete this clinical trial, we'll be telling the world, so far as we are aware, as per the literature research, this is the first medicinal cannabis product on Earth testing musculoskeletal pain. And when that slide I showed you earlier, we estimate roughly 2/3 of all usage is for chronic pain. So this is a game changer. It will allow us to offer, our sales team to offer the only clinically validated product to help treat chronic pain. It will give us something to export other than just being an Australian product. In other words, a legitimate talking point. And it will open up doors for us to perhaps have conversations with other companies about the phase 3. And when I mentioned the US prohibition, the talk in the industry is the US prohibition will be overturned at a federal level in the next few years. So, one of the options that we may have, and it's a big question here, is if that federal prohibition is overturned and we complete the phase 2 trial and it works, and it'll be peer reviewed, there's other options to us starting in the US. But that's a long shot. In the short term, what we want the halo effect that we are getting as being the company that's actually putting our significant money where our mouth is. And in the short term, we're hoping that the trial works to allow our sales force to go out and say to all those GPs, keeping in mind 90% of them are not yet on board because they're missing the research, we'll be able to say, here's the research you look for. So there's a short term and a long term play.
And providing the trial supports the hypothesis, how do you plan to scale that marketing, Mark, and the sales approach to educate those doctors and get them on board?
Oh, there is any amount of conferences, and you know, put it this way, I said to someone the other day, we'll be screaming this from the top of Mount Cannabis if it's the first one on earth, chronic pain. And it's interesting, you know, since I took this job, I listened to the Australian and New Zealand College of Pain Specialists. By the way, I didn't even know there was I thought every doctor was a pain specialist. You go to see a doctor when you're in pain, but there are pain specialists. I've learned about them, and the college is not yet supportive of medicinal cannabis because there's not gold standard peer-reviewed trials. So we will be using every available avenue to shine a light on this research for the 90-odd% of people and all the societies. And we'll be asking Peter Bruckner, Professor Peter Bruckner, to present. So it'll be a wonderful opportunity for us to communicate. And even if you don't invest, you're going to hear from me in a couple of years' time if this works. But it really is you can sense by the depths I'm going to in this answer. It's a game changer for us because it'll allow our sales force to talk to doctors, most of whom are skeptics because there's not world-class research. So it's a monumental opportunity for us to exploit, and we want to do it quickly before the Northern Hemisphere catches up.
Yeah. And you mentioned so your points of difference, obviously, the clinical trials, which, you know, sound like they'll be really, you know, instrumental in changing the game. What strategies do you have to protect the segment in your sports and competitive advantage in the area, in the market? Sorry.
Look, it's a good question. I think it's fair to say, you know, when I was at uni and you learn about what they call barriers to entry, and then normally you've got to get a license or you have to invest a lot of capital, or there might be an invention or some intellectual property. The 6 people that I showed you up front, that's the protection we've got. As long as we, well, first of all, treat them properly and look after them and run the company in a manner that we try and be. I think about having one on my shoulder all the time, one of these athletes. So we always try to be compliant. We're all squeaky clean of pharmaceutical because we've got their reputations at risk. I think it's highly unlikely that a competitor of ours will attempt to replicate the sports orientation. For a sector that's exploding in growth, and for people who are more and more interested in it, the media coverage that we've been able to get on the basis of these case studies. And I mentioned the dinners we hold and so forth. I mean, we've had 3 years of investing in a sport orientation, and so far as I'm aware, nothing is happening like that around the world, and certainly nothing in Australia. And by the way, if a competitor of ours wanted to try and put together a sport advisory board or athletic sport orientation, they'd be starting from a long way back, because those 6 that we've got are, world class. I mean, yeah, anyway, so we're the best jockey we've ever had, the best rugby league player people can remember, the 2 best basketballers of all time, and the 2 most winning coaches in this millennium. So we and a world-class director in the former Chen Morris. So we're going to be hard to beat.
Heavy hitters. We've got a question here from Ryan, and it's probably a good one for you to touch on as well, a little bit about the products in your arsenal to the extent that you can. They've asked, is the formulation used in the La Trobe trial the same formulation as the James Stewart capsule trial?
No. The short answer to that is no. The James Stewart capsule trial is CBD and CBG in a capsule. With no THC. So I just want to spend a minute or 2 on that. If you live on the mainland of Australia, you're not allowed to drive with THC in your bloodstream. And I'm sure in a few years' time, that'll be a thing of the past. I live in Victoria, and the Victorian government is running a trial to test impairment. I take medicinal cannabis for my sleep, and I would never drive at night because I'm clearly impaired. In fact, I have a wonderful night's sleep. But to suggest that I'm impaired today or in a month's time, some of the research I've read suggests that the THC can stay in your bloodstream for a month, is a nonsense. And I think the industry needs to catch up. We cannot, on the one hand, have legalised medicinal cannabis and have thousands and thousands of patients each month with a prescription driving illegally. So this trial that James Stewart has encouraged us to get involved with strips out the THC and replaces it with CBG, which he believes will also activate anti-inflammatory benefits of CBD. We've only just started. We've got 30, one of whom works in our office and has had a really good reaction. But I mean, it's very, very early days. But that's a capsule, no THC. The clinical trial, Ryan, that we've got at La Trobe University is oil, not a capsule, and it's got CBD and THC. It's a 50-50, 10-10, what the industry refers to as a 10-10 formulation. What I say, the secret herbs and spices are enabled Zelira to get a patent on the formulation. So it's ours, or sorry, it's theirs, but we've got this exclusive access to it. It is an oil. It's got CBD and THC in it, and the trials that James are doing are a capsule with no THC, so completely different.
And so which products are currently available to patients? We've
got 6, and hopefully by the end of this month, 6 will have become 9. So we have 3 oils, THC oil, which I take for sleep, a balance oil, and CBD strong oil. We have 3 dried flowers, indica, sativa, and hybrid, and they all each of our products attempts to help people with chronic pain, anxiety, and sleep. The big 3, so that we're relevant to sport. It's no good from a marketing perspective having a sports orientation, and for example, offering a medication a cannabis product that might be able to help with epilepsy, for example, or cancer pain. So we stick to what our athletes can advocate: chronic pain, sleep disorders, and anxiety. And so the 3 oils we've got apply to those 3. The 3 dried flowers we've got apply to those 3. The 3 dried flowers we are importing from the North America. These are craft dried flowers, so they're going to be premium, relatively expensive. And they, again, will have an orientation towards chronic pain, anxiety, and sleep. And so that'll be our 9th. And then we're hoping that the trial that we're doing with the capsules will justify a bigger investment, and then we'll roll that out as a bigger trial, and that will become our 10th product. But at the moment, we are 50-50 oil and flower, and we're about to have 3 more dried flowers.
And will that product be the first product without the THC in it?
No, there are others that don't have THC. The general rule is that if CBD without THC or doesn't really work as well, and I there's not enough evidence to suggest that, but there's plenty of anecdotal evidence that you need the CBD with some THC to activate. Been a little bit like a catalyst for those of us who did a bit of science at school. The industry, we refer to this as the entourage effect. So a little bit of THC helps the CBD. Anyway, there are plenty that don't have any, and it works for some people, but the rule of thumb is that you need more than just CBD. So we're trialing this THC-free capsule, hoping that CBG will activate the CBD. Now, I can forgive anybody that's lost the acronyms. I don't even begin to try and pronounce cannabinoid and all the rest of it. So we have to work with acronyms. But the key thing is that if this trial goes as we're hoping it will, and as James think it will, then we'll have a treatment option for people who drive for a living, or FIFO workers. So we think that could be a real, in fact, we know if it goes as well as we expect it to, there's going to be a wonderful opportunity for us to encourage people to get involved with this trial using a pain treatment. This is another thing, Anna, that I've learned in my time with pain. And you go into any chemist, it's full of pain treatments, and a lot of the people listening and will know somebody if they're not suffering pain themselves. So I say to people, okay, you've got chronic pain. That, by the way, means for 3 months you've had a bad back or arthritis or nerve pain or headaches or post-surgical pain, and it's miserable for 3 months. So you can either get surgery, which is very expensive. You can take anti-inflammatories, and they can be nasty in your stomach. You can take opioids, and they can be really dangerous and addictive. You can live with the pain, which a lot of people do, or you can try medicinal. Go and talk to your doctor and try medicinal cannabis. And that because of this athletes that we've got that have done such a good job of shining a light on the fact that it's legal and it may be a treatment option, has just created an uplift in demand. And people are saying, well, why not? I'll go and talk to my doctor. And more of them are aware of it. So in my humble opinion, it's at the very least, it's worthwhile talking to your doctor, because if your chronic pain is unrelenting, the chances are you're not getting a good night's sleep, without which all of us are in trouble. And you can probably get miserable, if not stressed and anxious. So that's a pretty simple message.
I know you mentioned it can be hard to come across a doctor who does prescribe. Can you share with everyone on the call how, if if their own doctor doesn't prescribe, how they can find one who does?
Yeah. Look, you don't have to Google terribly far before you can find a prescriber. I'd mentioned James Stewart. He's won the Australian Medicinal Cannabis Doctor of the Year award twice. He's based on the Sunshine Coast, and does plenty of telehealth. We refer people to Green Care, a telehealth provider. So they're the first two. James is incomparable in my opinion. I've as I said, he's my doctor. I've referred my family members to him, and he's a hell of a good guy and really, really experienced. But there are lots of them starting with him and Green Care.
Amazing. We've got a question here, another one from Ryan. Keep them coming. They've asked, does Levin's oil formulations address the inherent low bioavailability of cannabis oil?
Yeah, that's a ripper question. So I can tell people that bioavailability, my scientific learning curves are in pretty steep. So bioavailability is a fancy way of saying the way in which the body absorbs cannabis. So drops under the tongue are not the best way to absorb cannabis. First of all, the surface area is not as big as it could be. Secondly, the mouth's apparently not as good. So we're talking to one of our suppliers about capsules that would allow a much bigger uplift in bioavailability. In other words, the capsule finds its way into your lower intestine, and you, in theory, you don't need as much. So it's quite topical for us at the moment, Ryan, because we're in deep discussions with one of our suppliers about perhaps capsules instead of oil, and therefore ideally cheaper because you don't need as much with the improvement in bioavailability. But there's a long way to go. The sector is so new. It was legalized in 2016. We started in 2017. I mean, there's a lot of shakedown and a lot of research going on under the heading of bioavailability. Typically speaking, and maybe I'm sort of, a scientist might challenge me here, so I'll preface it by saying that, but the products that we in the industry prescribe with oil is for chronic symptoms, chronic insomnia, chronic stress and anxiety, chronic pain. Dried flower is a treatment for acute. So if you hurt your back, for example, or something happens and you've got acute pain, then people refer to dried flower. If you've got let's say you've been overseas, or you jet lag, or you've got a big busy day the following day, then that's when you might use dried flower to get yourself a better night's sleep. And the same applies for anxiety. So think chronic and acute. Chronic is oil. Acute has got better bioavailability, and you can get a better impact. But it's moving. It's moving, and in 12 months' time, it'll be even more advanced. But we're looking at capsules because of that bioavailability upswing.
Absolutely fascinating. I feel like I can only imagine your learning curve.
Yeah, I don't, and I'm sure people are listening going, this guy's out of his depth, but I'm hanging on, and what I can say with great authority is that the sector's changing and the products are emerging with the science.
Amazing. Now, I'm conscious of time, everybody. We've got a few minutes left, so if you've got any last-minute questions, I might just close us off then with another question for you, Mark. Now, obviously, you've had some significant increases in demand and sales recently, which is really exciting to see. You mentioned your suppliers and your supply chain. Are they geared up and ready to support the growth of Levin Health?
It's a terrific question. So when you're talking to 10 international suppliers, that's a challenge. We can go to southwest of WA, we can go to the northwest of Victoria and look and see and satisfy ourselves that our domestic suppliers, Cam Group and Little Green Farmer, can gear up. It's much harder internationally. So yeah, at the moment, it is. Every now and then we either run out of a product or we get really, really close to touching the bottom because demand outstrip supply. We, it's Michael Constable, our CFO, is the supply chain manager, and he's in constant dialogue with our suppliers and trying to manage sales. And I mentioned that we just had this $1 million month. That's fantastic. So the next challenge is how do we equip our prescribers with enough to have a more than $1 million in November. And so we're constantly projecting and talking to the manufacturers, and they, it's a natural product, so there's got to be a growth cycle, and it's a sweet science that we haven't always got right. But one thing I can say to anyone who's listening and is serious about investing is we will invest your money in inventory. And so money talks in this space. If we walk into a supplier and we say, right, we want thousands of units, and this is the distribution schedule over the next 6 to 12 months, and we're able to pay for it, that counts for a lot and puts us at the front of the queue. So when we were small and didn't have the money, we were at the beck and, it was nowhere near. Now that we're having this sort of, our growth has been so pronounced, we've got more muscle at the table, and it's a better but still a complicated conversation to have.
Amazing. And as you've touched on the investment, that's what we're all here for. So a little bit of info about where we're at in the process, everyone. The offer will be going live next week. So you will receive an offer document, will become available on the platform for you to view when making your decision to invest. You'll also be able to view the constitution and a subscription agreement from the company. Of course, if you've got any questions in the meantime, Mark is available. So you can reach out via the message function on the company's Birchal page. So please do so. And if you've not already expressed interest, please do that as well, because we will be opening the investment round exclusively to the expression of interest list to begin with. So in order to not miss out and be first to know, please express interest, and you'll be able to access that when all of the info comes out. So that's, I think, probably it. We've had some great questions. Thank everyone for joining us today. I'll let Mark sign us off, but from Birchal, we really appreciate you all taking the time to join us today, and we'll see you at the next Q&A.
Thanks. First of all, I want to thank everybody for their time. Thank you for putting this all together, Anna. I just want to finish by saying this. I've been in the workforce for 37 years, and as I mentioned earlier, lucky enough to do a lot of it in sport. I've never had a job as gratifying as this. The growth of our business, and indeed the sector, is on the basis of helping people. And I want to finish with a story that you asked me about last time, Anna. The best day's work I've had in this 3-odd years was a friend of mine with whom I played cricket in Victoria. During lockdown, it was pretty stressful. He was a tradesman in just out of Geelong. And his daughter, 17-year-old daughter, year 12, woke up one morning with all but full-blown Tourette's. Now, it's not quite Tourette's. He told me it's another name, but it had all the symptoms of tics and swearing and mood swings and violence. And you can imagine how this disrupted the family in year 12. I rang him and suggested that he could consider medicinal cannabis as a treatment for his daughter, because I'd heard somewhere or another that it might help. And I went to his 50th last year and saw this young woman who was no longer swearing and violent and ticking, had gone back to university, had a job, and seemed to be living life. And he said to me afterwards that medicinal cannabis had made a monumental difference to their lives, as you can imagine. Now, I'm not even sure she was taking Levin Health stuff. To be honest, it doesn't matter. And that's the beauty, by the way, of the Green Care people and James, but they're all agnostic. But the sector is growing on the basis of small incremental stories like that young lass. And I just find it incredibly gratifying. And as I said, I've never had anything that people are more interested in. So I'd love you all to get involved, because chances are somebody that's suffering pain, anxiety and sleep. And it's quite extraordinary, this plant that we're just unlocking. So on that basis, thanks very much. And I hope you become involved.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.